Before you clicked this, something already felt different, didn't it? Not louder, not dramatic, just quieter. There's a strange calm in you lately. Things that used to shake your balance don't reach as deep anymore. And that's confusing, because part of you wonders, why does it hurt less when nothing outside has changed? Let me say this gently. When something stops having power over you, it's not because you hardened. It's because something inside you finally stood up. Libra, you're not losing sensitivity. You're losing tolerance for what drains you. If this moment feels personal, leave a plant in the comments, not for me, but as a quiet promise to yourself. And here's a question to sit with, just for a breath. What if this calm isn't the end of a struggle, but the beginning of justice working in your favor? Stay with me, because what's unfolding next isn't loud, but it's real. It's subtle, Libra. So subtle that you might have missed it at first. The shift didn't arrive with fireworks. It didn't announce itself. It slipped in quietly, through moments you didn't think mattered. You noticed it when you paused instead of reacting, when your chest didn't tighten the way it used to, when a familiar situation showed up and your body didn't brace for impact anymore. That's not distance, that's discernment. I'm saying this as someone who's watched you carry more than your share. You didn't stop caring. You stopped absorbing what was never yours to hold. For a long time, balance meant staying calm no matter the cost. It meant choosing harmony even when it asked you to swallow your truth. And you were good at that. Too good. But something inside you has been reordering itself. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough that the old patterns no longer fit the way they used to. Have you felt that moment? The one where you still listen, but you don't lean forward anymore? That's usually where the real change begins. People think power shows up as control. But for someone like you, Libra, power shows up as restraint, as knowing when not to engage, as choosing silence without shrinking. There's a difference between avoiding conflict and refusing to feed it. And lately, you've been doing the second one, even if you haven't named it that way yet. I've seen this before. When a person stops explaining themselves to those who never listened, when they stop translating their needs into softer language, when they finally trust that clarity doesn't require consensus. That's when the energy around them starts to shift. Not because the world suddenly became fair, but because they stopped negotiating their own center. Let me ask you something, gently. When was the last time you felt proud of how calmly you walked away, without needing anyone else to understand why? That moment matters more than you think. Because what's happening here isn't withdrawal, it's alignment. Your nervous system is learning a new rhythm, one that doesn't spike at every imbalance, one that doesn't rush to restore peace at your own expense. And when that happens, something interesting follows. The dynamics around you begin to change their tone. The conversations lose their grip. The pressure doesn't land the same way. Not because you hardened, but because you grounded. This is the kind of shift most people only notice in hindsight. They call it growth later, or healing, or finally feeling like themselves again. But right now, it just feels different, quieter, more spacious. And if you sit with that space for a moment, without trying to fill it, you might start to sense something else underneath. A realization forming. Not about what hurt you, but about why it no longer gets to decide your next move. Stay right here with me. Because the moment you stopped feeding that old dynamic, something else quietly began to loosen its hold. And that's where this story deepens. There's something else worth noticing, Libra. And it may feel uncomfortable at first. Not because it's wrong, but because it asks for honesty without blame. The energy that hurt you before was never stronger than you. It just knew where you were generous. You have a way of reading the room before anyone else speaks, of feeling the imbalance before it becomes visible. And for a long time, you responded to that by smoothing things over. You carried emotional weight so others wouldn't have to. You translated tension into silence. You paid the cost so the space could feel calm. That wasn't weakness, that was skill. But in a world that often confuses harmony with avoidance, your fairness became an open door. People leaned on it. Situations rested their mess there. And over time, that energy learned something. That you would stay. And that you would adjust. That you would keep the scales balanced even if they tipped against you. I'm telling you this as a friend, not a critic. Because you didn't do it out of fear. You did it out of principle. You believed that if you stayed reasonable long enough, things would eventually settle. That if you held the middle ground, others would meet you there. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And when they don't, the cost quietly lands on you. Have you ever noticed how exhaustion shows up right after you say everything is fine? That's usually the signal. Not that you chose wrong, but that the strategy has expired. There comes a point when fairness stops being mutual and starts becoming self-erasure. Not because you intended it, but because no one ever asked you to stop. And that's where the misunderstanding lives, onto the one that makes it seem like the energy had power over you. It didn't. It was simply being fed by your commitment to peace. Here's the part people rarely talk about. Balance isn't maintained by sacrifice alone. It's maintained by consent. And lately, something in you has been withdrawing that consent. Not angrily, not dramatically, just quietly. You've been listening to the pause between your thoughts. You've been noticing the moment before you step in to fix things. And sometimes you've chosen not to. That choice matters, because it's the moment where justice begins to change form, not as punishment, not as confrontation, but as a shift in participation. Let me ask you this, softly. What changed the first time you didn't rush to restore balance and nothing fell apart? That question opens a door, and behind it is a realization you don't have to force. That your presence is powerful, and so is your absence. When you stop compensating, the system has to recalibrate. When you stop carrying, the weight reveals where it truly belongs. Stay with that thought for a breath. Because once you see how the energy learned its influence, you also begin to sense how easily that influence loosens when you no longer offer it a place to rest. And from there, something even quieter begins to happen. A release that doesn't announce itself, but changes everything that comes next. At some point, Libra, the shift stopped being theoretical. It stopped living only in your awareness, and it began showing up in the smallest, quietest choices. There was no confrontation, no final speech, no dramatic moment where everything suddenly made sense. It was almost disappointingly ordinary. A message you read and didn't answer right away. A conversation you felt forming and chose not to step into. A pause where you realized you were tired, not angry, not defeated, just tired. That's the part people underestimate. Real turning points rarely announce themselves. They arrive disguised as rest. You didn't stop explaining because you gave up. You stopped because something inside you finally recognized the pattern. That explaining had never led to understanding. That proving had never led to peace. So you let the silence do what words never could. And here's what's important. This wasn't avoidance, it was discernment. Avoidance runs away. Discernment stays present, but chooses differently. You were still aware, still attentive, still kind, You just weren't volunteering your energy anymore. That's a very Libra moment, when balance stops meaning engagement at all costs and starts meaning self-respect. I've seen how difficult that was for you, because part of you worried what that pause would create. You wondered if not responding meant things would fall apart, if not smoothing things over would invite chaos. But something surprising happened instead. Nothing collapsed. The world didn't end. The situation didn't explode. The imbalance didn't grow louder. It simply revealed itself. And that's when you began to understand something quietly profound, that the energy you thought you were managing was actually being sustained by your participation. Let me ask you something, gently. Do you remember the first time you chose rest over resolution and felt a strange sense of relief instead of guilt? That relief wasn't laziness, it was truth finding room to breathe. Because every system changes the moment one person stops compensating. Every dynamic shifts when one person steps back without bitterness, without drama, without explanation. And that's exactly what you did. You didn't demand justice. You didn't seek validation. You simply stopped feeding what drained you. That choice carries more power than confrontation ever could, because it removes the fuel, not just the fire. And when the fuel is gone, something subtle begins to loosen. The pull weakens, the pressure fades, the emotional hooks lose their grip, not all at once, not loudly, but steadily. You may have noticed it in your body first, a calmer breath, a quieter chest, a sense that you didn't need to prepare for impact anymore. That's not coincidence. That's alignment starting to take shape. And if you stay with that stillness a little longer, without rushing to fill it or fix it, you'll begin to notice something else emerging underneath. A shift that doesn't require effort. A release that doesn't need explanation. Because once you stop feeding the old dynamic, something else begins to withdraw on its own. And that's where the story deepens again. There's a moment, Libra, when you start to realize that justice doesn't look the way you were taught to expect it. It doesn't arrive with raised voices. It doesn't announce a verdict. It doesn't even require an apology. It simply withdraws. You feel it first as a strange absence. A tension that used to live in your chest is suddenly no longer there, not because it was resolved, but because it no longer has access to you. For so long, you believed justice meant balance being restored through effort, through explanation, through fairness patiently modeled until others caught up. But divine justice works on a different axis. It doesn't correct people. It corrects alignment. And alignment shifts the moment you stop supplying energy to what was never meant to be sustained. I want you to hear this clearly, as a friend. Nothing was taken from them. Nothing was forced. Nothing was punished. They simply lost their reach. The words that once lingered in your mind now pass through without landing. The financial pressure that used to cloud your decisions no longer dictates your next move. The emotional pull that once shaped your choices has quietly loosened its grip. Not because you fought back, but because you stepped back. That distinction matters. Justice is not about watching someone fall from a distance. It's about realizing they can no longer touch your center. They can still exist. They can still move through their world. But they don't get to move you anymore. And that's where the power truly shifts. You may have noticed it in small, almost unremarkable ways. You sleep differently. You hesitate less before choosing yourself. You make decisions with a steadier hand because you're no longer compensating for someone else's imbalance. Let me ask you something, quietly. When was the last time you made a choice without checking how it would affect the person who once drained you? That pause you felt afterward, that wasn't guilt, that wasn't relief, that was something else entirely, that was freedom beginning to take shape. Divine justice doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't need drama. It doesn't need a story anyone else understands. It unfolds the moment your nervous system stops bracing, the moment your intuition stops whispering warnings, the moment your life begins to organize itself around what feels true instead of what feels tense. And here's the part few people talk about. When energy withdraws its access, it doesn't leave chaos behind. It leaves clarity, and the noise fades, the pressure lifts, and what remains is space. Space to think clearly about money. Space to choose relationships that don't require self-erasure. Space to move forward without dragging old dynamics behind you. You didn't demand this justice. You didn't chase it. You allowed it. By no longer offering your attention, your explanation, your labor to something that thrived on imbalance. And if you sit with that truth for a moment without rushing to label it, you might notice something else quietly forming. A new sense of stability, not imposed, not forced, but emerging naturally now that nothing is pulling you off center. Stay right here with me, because when power withdraws from what hurt you, it doesn't disappear, it returns. And where it begins to settle next changes the shape of everything that follows. And once the weight is gone, Libra, something unexpected happens. Not excitement, not euphoria, just space. At first it feels unfamiliar, almost empty, like a room you've just cleared after years of keeping it full, unsure what it's meant to hold now. Your thoughts slow down. They stop racing ahead to prepare for tension that may never come. Decisions feel quieter, less reactive, more considered. And for the first time in a long while, your body stops bracing. That sense of inner safety returning is subtle, but unmistakable. You notice it when you wake up, and your first thought isn't concern. When you review your day and realize you're choosing from clarity, not pressure. This is where things begin to flow again. Not because everything is suddenly easy, but because you're no longer moving against yourself. Your intuition starts speaking more clearly, not louder, just without interruption. You catch yourself pausing before a purchase, before a commitment, before a conversation that once would have pulled you in. And instead of tension, there's discernment. You're not cutting yourself off from life, you're filtering it. That changes everything. Money decisions feel steadier now, not driven by urgency, not influenced by emotional weight that never belonged to you. You start seeing where your energy actually creates value, where it leaks, and where it deserves to stay. There's a quiet confidence in that awareness, not flashy, not performative, but grounded. And that same shift shows up in the way you relate. You're not chasing connection anymore. You're noticing how it feels to be met. Respect becomes non-negotiable, not as a demand, but as a baseline you no longer explain. Let me ask you something gently. When was the last time you felt calm in the presence of possibility, instead of anxious about making the right choice? That calm is new, and it matters, because it means you're no longer making decisions to stabilize someone else's world. You're building your own. Relationships begin to reflect that change. Some fade naturally. Others approach more carefully, as if they can sense the shift in your center. And the connections that remain, or arrive later, carry a different tone, less urgency, more mutual regard. You may not even label it as healing. It just feels healthier. Your life begins organizing itself around what supports you instead of what drains you. And here's the part that doesn't get enough attention. This space you've created isn't meant to be filled immediately. It's meant to be inhabited, to let you notice what feels right without rushing to name it, to let you trust your timing instead of forcing outcomes. Stay with that openness for a moment, not to wait for something, but to recognize what's already here. Because when the weight lifts, it doesn't just create room for new things to enter. It allows you to stand differently inside your own life. And from that steadier place, a new kind of balance quietly begins to form. And this is where balance begins to feel different, Libra. Not lighter, not easier, just truer. For most of your life, balance meant adjusting yourself. It meant smoothing edges, lowering your voice, finding the middle ground even when the ground beneath you felt uneven. You were taught that harmony was something you created by giving a little more than you received, by staying composed, by holding space when others couldn't. And for a long time, that worked. Until it didn't. Because there's a quiet cost to always being the one who bends. And eventually, the body notices what the mind tries to justify. Balance in this season doesn't ask you to shrink anymore. It doesn't ask you to keep the peace by losing yourself. It asks you to stand, not rigid, not defensive, just rooted. You may feel it when you say no without rehearsing, when you step back without apologizing, when you choose not to explain a decision that already feels settled inside you. That isn't coldness, that's clarity. Your kindness hasn't disappeared. It's simply become more intentional. You're learning that compassion doesn't require unlimited access, and fairness doesn't mean equal sacrifice. This version of balance has edges, gentle ones, but real. It shows up as boundaries that feel calm instead of tense, as choices that don't need approval to feel right, as peace that doesn't collapse the moment someone misunderstands you. Let me ask you something softly. When was the last time you felt steady in your truth, even while someone else was uncomfortable? That steadiness is new, and it's earned, because balance that includes you doesn't wobble the way the old kind did. It doesn't depend on constant adjustment. It holds its shape. You may notice your energy settling lower in your body now, less in the chest, more in the ground beneath your feet. There's a quiet authority there, not spoken, felt. People respond differently to it. Some lean in with respect. Some drift away without conflict. Neither requires your management. And that's the relief. You're no longer responsible for keeping everything level. You're responsible for staying aligned. That distinction frees up more than you realize. It gives you time back. It gives your nervous system a break. It gives your life permission to reorganize around what supports you. This balance doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply becomes the way you move. You breathe differently. You listen differently. You choose differently. And perhaps the most surprising part is how natural it feels once you stop resisting it. As if this was always the balance you were meant to grow into. Not the one that kept everyone comfortable, but the one that keeps you whole. Stay with that feeling for a moment. The groundedness, the quiet strength, the sense that you're no longer negotiating your place in the room. Because when balance finally includes you, it changes what you're available for next. And from this steadier ground, there's one more realization waiting. Not about what you've left behind, but about where you're standing now, and what that makes possible as the story gently moves forward. And this is where it leaves you, Libra. Not at the finish line, not at some perfect destination, but somewhere far more honest. You're standing in a place that finally feels centered. Nothing magical happened overnight. Nothing outside your life suddenly rearranged itself to accommodate you. Yet somehow, you're no longer being pulled in every direction. The pressure that once bent you out of shape doesn't land the same way anymore. The familiar patterns that used to reopen old wounds no longer find the same entry point. And that matters, because it tells you something important about where you are now. You're not healed in the way movies promise. You're grounded in the way real life requires. There's a difference. 2026 doesn't offer perfection. It doesn't remove every challenge. It doesn't guarantee that difficult moments won't appear again. But it does something quieter. It places you in the right position. A position where you're not constantly correcting imbalance. Where you're not absorbing energy that was never meant to pass through you. Where you're not repeating the same emotional labor just to keep things from tipping. You've stepped out of the old current. And now, when something approaches you, it has to meet you where you stand, not where you used to bend. There's relief in that, not loud relief. The kind that settles in your shoulders, the kind that lets your breath drop a little lower, the kind that doesn't need words to prove itself. You may notice how differently you move through your days now, how your decisions feel less urgent, how your reactions feel more measured, how silence no longer feels like something you need to fill. That's not distance, that's trust. Trust in your ability to sense what belongs with you and what no longer does. Trust in your timing. Trust in the quiet signals that guide you without forcing you. Let me ask you something, just to sit with. When was the last time you realized that something which once hurt deeply now barely registers at all? That shift didn't happen because time erased it. It happened because you changed your relationship to it. And that's the kind of justice that doesn't need an audience. Justice doesn't always come as resolution. Sometimes it comes as release. Sometimes it shows up as neutrality. Sometimes it arrives the moment you stop being affected by what once had access to you. That's not forgetting. That's integration. You didn't lose your sensitivity. You refined it. You didn't harden your heart. You protected it. And now, as you move forward from this place, you carry something different with you. Not armor, not defenses, but balance that includes you. So if you notice yourself reacting less, resting more, choosing differently, let that be enough. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to justify it. You don't need to rush it. Because if something no longer hurts the way it used to, that's not time passing. That's alignment taking hold. That's justice working quietly in your favor. And from here, whatever comes next will meet a version of you that is no longer off-center. And before we close this space, Libra, let me leave you with something simple. Notice how quiet it feels right now. Not empty, just clear. That's the sound of nothing pulling at you anymore. Here's an observation you may not have named yet. When balance finally includes you, you stop needing closure from the past, because your body already knows where it stands. So let me ask you this, gently. What part of your life feels lighter without you trying to fix it? If you can, sit with that question tonight. No answers, no analysis, just presence. Here's a small inner practice for the next few days. When something asks for your attention, pause for one breath. Place a hand on your chest and quietly ask yourself, does this keep me centered or pull me away? That pause is enough. You don't need to act on it yet. And if silence shows up, don't rush to fill it. Silence isn't absence. It's information arriving slowly. I'll leave you with a promise that isn't really a promise, just a sense. This journey isn't ending here. The next message is already forming. Not to tell you what to do, but to meet you where you're standing now. If something in this message resonated, leave a comment below. Even a single word is enough. It lets this space stay alive. Subscribe if you'd like to keep walking this path together. And most of all, Libra, trust yourself. Because the version of you listening right now is no longer off balance. And that changes everything. We'll talk again soon.